Good morning. How are we? Good? Bien? That's my Spanish. Done now. Cerveza, bien. Done. It's wonderful to be here. And as you've just heard, I have two children of my own. And I want to start this morning by asking you the question, how many of you have children of your own? Can you put up your hands if you are a parent? Keep your hands up for a moment. Please keep your hands up if you're a parent. If your children if you have teenagers at home, or you have survived having teenagers at home, keep your hands in the air, please. I can tell, by the way. Thank you very much. Parents who have had teenagers look a certain way. I was really good looking and young before I had teenagers. Now look at me. I think the reason why I travel around the world most of my life is because I have two teenagers at home. I want to start this morning by telling you about my two children, because I think watching them has made me realize more than anything else why our ability to change and transform has never been more important. And in particular, why our ability to change and transform education has never been more important. Now, I'm going to start by telling you about my 14-year-old son. His name is Andrew. He's a lovely boy, especially when I'm 1,000 miles away from him, because he can't argue with me from here. But he is a typical teenage boy. His bedroom smells. It's funny. Don't tell him I've told you this. But he's just discovered girls, which means suddenly his room smells of antiperspirant, and his hair is done every day. It's wonderful. But the other day, I came home from work, and I went into here and knocked on his bedroom door. He was in his bedroom playing on his computer game. And he was playing FIFA. He was playing the football game. And I walked in, and he didn't notice me because he had his headset on, and he was talking to another player. He was talking to another child. It was only when I stopped and stood in the corner of his room that I realized that he was speaking to this other player in Russian. Now, here's the important thing to know. My child has never been taught Russian. They don't do Russian in English schools. Particularly right now, there is not a lot of love for Russia in England, right? But my son is talking Russian. And he's clearly, not necessarily, the language sometimes is not necessarily, you can tell, And he's talking really with energy in Russian. Anyway, he finishes his game, and I turn round to him, and he takes off his headphones. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm playing with my friend Sergey." I said, "Your friend Sergey?" He said, "Yes, he's in Moscow." I said, "So you're playing football on your computer with a friend in..." He said, "Yes." I said, "What?" I said, "Where did you learn to speak Russian?" He said, "Well, we don't just play football together." He said, "When we're playing football, I teach him English, and he teaches me Russian." Now, isn't that extraordinary? And doesn't that put into context for us just why schools and education has to think differently because of the impact of technology? There is an argument that says, my son is probably learning more when he's not at school than when he is at school. that he's learning through collaborative relationships across the world. Which brings me on to telling you about my daughter. Now, my daughter is 18 years old, and she's just left home. My daughter has just gone to university. Now, it's funny. Maybe it's the difference between mothers and fathers. The day my daughter left home to go to university, my wife was like, I'm like, bye. But I'm very proud of my daughter because, and this is true, my daughter has chosen to train to be a teacher. I could not be prouder of my daughter because, given my own background, it will not surprise you to know that I believe that teaching is the greatest of all professions. Because when you think about it, without education, the world has nothing. And so the fact that my daughter has chosen to be a teacher is a great source of pride for me and my wife. My wife is still a head teacher. So she comes from she's gone to the family business. But last year, before she left school, my wife and I went to our final parent consultation meeting, right? You know, where we go in as parents and we hear about the progress of our children. And it was the last time we would go in to see my daughter's teachers. Now, I have to be honest with you. I hate parent consultation evening. I don't know what they're like in Spain, but in England, it's just like a fight between parents to get to see the teachers. So I'm really glad this is my final parent-teacher evening for my daughter. So we arrive, and I'm very keen to meet my daughter's history teacher. Because my daughter's history teacher is her hero. Until my daughter was 13, I was her hero. It's funny, those of you that have had teenage children will know what I'm saying. Up until the time our children are 13, literally until the night before their 13th birthday, you are a god to your children. Everything you say is wisdom. Everything you say is funny. And then they go to bed on the night before their 13th birthday, and they say, "Good night, Mummy. Good night, Daddy. Mwah, mwah. Everything's fine." They wake up 10 hours later, and you are dead to them. The best you can be to your child when they're 13 is an embarrassment. It's funny. At 13, you become an embarrassment and a bank to your children. And from then on, my daughter's new hero was her history teacher. So she would come home from school every day, and she would say things to me like, "Oh, he's so funny. He's so clever." And I remember one day saying to her, "So what have you been studying in history with Mr. Wonderful?" And she said to me, "Oh, you wouldn't understand." So I couldn't wait to meet Mr. History at parent evening because I wanted to punch him. So we turn up and we sit down with Mr. History. And it turns out that Mr. History thinks my daughter is as wonderful as she thinks he is. So Mr. History starts talking, and he says, "Oh, your daughter is an amazing student." I start giggling, because I know what my daughter's like in real life. Have you noticed this? our children are totally different people at home and at school. At home, they're psychopaths. At school, they're geniuses, apparently. Right? So he starts telling us about how wonderful our daughter is. And apparently, he says, her essays, her assignments, her writing is exceptional. Her ability to understand history from different viewpoints is extraordinary. He said she is so mature in her writing. Now, at this point, I'm full out laughing. I'm sat there. You see, most proper parents, which obviously I'm not, most proper parents, when the teacher is speaking like this, would be sat there going, oh, thank you. Thank you for telling me about my wonderful daughter. I clearly am not a normal parent because I'm laughing, right? And the reason I'm laughing is because I know how my daughter does her history homework. And I'm about to tell the history teacher how my daughter does her homework when my wife does something that she's not done in the 22 years we have been married. She takes my hand and holds it gently under the table. Now, maybe it's because I'm a man of a certain age that I misread the situation. I think tonight is the night. I'm thinking, I'm sure it's not my birthday, but who cares? So now I just want the meeting to end so we can go home, right? However, as my knuckles started to break on my hand, I started to realize my mistake. And what my wife was doing was that thing that our partners do, which is actually body language for shut your mouth. You see, she was right. Because let me tell you how my daughter does her homework. She comes home. She goes to her bedroom where she has her tablet computer, her laptop. And she goes on to her social network. Now, this time last year, my daughter had over 4,000 connections through Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, over 4,000. And what she did would be that she would type in her essay title, and she would hit send. Then she would go downstairs and make herself a cup of coffee in the frothy coffee machine, which would take 5 minutes. She would then take her new coffee up to her bedroom, and by the time she had returned to her bedroom, her essay had basically been written for her. Because many of her friends around the world will have contributed to the content of what she needed to write. Now, she didn't just send that in to her history teacher. What she did was she took that information, she edited it, she selected the bits that were most relevant to what she had to respond to, she packaged it together, and then she gave it to her history teacher. So, for example, if she was writing an essay about the Russian Revolution, she would have had contacts of her age in Russia who would have given her their insight into the Russian Revolution. Now, of course, the reason my wife was squeezing my hand was because she knew that if I told the history teacher how my daughter had done her homework, he may well have said that she was cheating. That, for me, is a major issue we have to deal with in education. Because my argument is that my daughter is demonstrating the kind of skills and behaviors that major companies around the world would pay big money for if all people could think that way. And this, for me, is actually why we find change so difficult, why we find change so complicated. Because we were not, in many ways, trained and educated to think for ourselves, to see ourselves entrepreneurially, to see ourselves in enterprising ways. We were taught that knowledge is power. We were taught that the more you know and the more that you can remember, the cleverer you are. And of course, the truth is that's never been the case. But now more than ever, it's not what you know, it's how you behave. It's how you find responses to the challenges you face. It's how you continuously spend your life researching and questioning and challenging. It's fascinating to me because one of the best examples of what I mean is when you think about the way, for example, most children are taught math in schools. Most children are taught math. So what they do is they're taught a rule, and then they keep having to show they know how to use the rule by getting the correct answer in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sums and maths equations. It's why so many people leave education thinking that math isn't a creative subject. Most people I come across tell me that they were never very good at math at school. And what they mean is, I wasn't very good at finding the right answer. When you talk, as I'm sure there are better experts than me in this room, to, for example, a professor of pure mathematics, a professor of pure mathematics will tell you that the expert mathematician isn't interested in the right answer. An expert mathematician is interested in searching for the beauty of the proof. In other words, the art of a mathematician is to constantly challenge and break the rules, to constantly look beyond the right answer, to discover new answers and new approaches and new ways of thinking. And so fundamentally for me, we have a massive problem in education. Because as we all know, whereas 40, 50, 60 years ago, the main purpose of education was to prepare most of our children to work in factories and industries, to be able to do what they were told, to be able to keep doing the job correctly. That world doesn't exist anymore. We've moved on. And we moved on into a world where the future is changing so fast. I believe that for the first time in human history, the speed of change is now moving faster than humanity's ability to understand and control it. And that is partly because of the extraordinary doors that new technology have opened for us. But what we have to do is to start to reimagine what that process should be. Now, there's a danger, because there's a danger in all walks of life, that when people feel under pressure, when they don't feel in control, they just desperately search for quick answers. I call them the silver bullets. And through recent history, we have made so many mistakes in education by just thinking the answer is in a simple new initiative or new policy or new idea. And I have to say that when I look at the history of technology in education over the last 20 years, whilst I think the technology in itself has been really exciting, I think all too often we've made the mistake of thinking that technology is the answer. And I want to stand up here before you today and say something quite controversial. Technology in itself is not the answer to the future of education. And I'll explain that in a few minutes. Technology is an incredible catalyst. It is an extraordinary tool. But if we think that just by investing in technology will transform education, we're wrong. Because we have a massive stage to make before we do that. What we have to do is to recalibrate, to reimagine the purpose of education first. When I look at the United Kingdom over the last 20 years, a country that has been recognized around the world for its continuous investment in technology and education, we have made so many mistakes, it's unbelievable. We have wasted billions of euros in the belief that just by buying new equipment, we would transform education. So we've been spending all this money on new equipment. Meanwhile, our education system has been getting worse and worse and worse. Yes, every school has interactive boards. Yes, every school had wireless internet access. And many schools have tablets. And every school has laptops and computers. But it's not changed anything. Because we haven't asked the fundamental questions about how education as a process needs to change first. And there's a danger with these silver bullets, you see. Because what happens is this. Because of the way we were educated, we have been trained to believe that if something doesn't work, it's because we didn't try hard enough. Let me show you what I mean. I don't know how many of you will have seen this before. And is it possible just to bring the lights down for a minute so that people can really, thank you, perfect. You'll notice this is a photograph of a scene in a fishing village in the north of Scotland. Now I need you to look carefully at this picture. You will see that here there is a man stood on his van that is sinking. Now, I don't want to say anything too dangerous because I don't know for sure. But there is a bar just here. Now, whether the two things are connected, I don't know. But the man now finds himself in this very dangerous situation. Now, the really important thing to notice here is that a group of people have gathered to help him. What's important to notice about this group of people is that they are all men. And I'm talking to the women in the audience here. Have you noticed, because it's the same everywhere in the world, have you noticed that whenever there's a physical problem, men seem to think it is their responsibility to solve it? It's like the caveman comes out in us again.
You stay here, little lady. I sought physical problem. And then you celebrate my heroism.
Right? So the men have come out of the bar to help solve the problem. And they have all assumed, and men, we are all guilty of this, they have all assumed man problem-solving position. Now, what they've decided isn't stupid. It makes a lot of sense. Because what they've decided is that they can use this crane to lift the van out of the water. It's a very sensible idea, don't you think? And so now they're very excited about their idea. They're thinking to themselves, this is tremendous. We are going to solve the problem, go back to the bar, and all of our women will tell us how marvelous we are. And look, everything's going fantastically well. The other thing to notice about this picture is that there now are 3 times as many men in the picture as were in the first picture. And that's because nothing attracts men to other men more
than success.
They are all now, they've moved from man problem solving position to man problem solved position. And they are ready to celebrate their greatness. Everything is going brilliantly until this happens. Hold on. Now, what you need to notice about this picture is all the men have run away. Even the dog, who is a boy dog, is running away. I didn't think of it. It wasn't my idea. But the point is this. Because of the way we've been educated, and the way we've been educated, as I said before, is to believe that if something isn't working, it's because we weren't trying hard enough. Their first reaction is to decide that the reason this didn't work is because they didn't have a big enough crane. So off they go and get themselves a bigger crane. And look, all the men have come back again.
Oh, that was it, yes. We just needed a bigger crane. Now we have a bigger crane, we will solve the problem.
This is the issue, right? Because the mistake we've been making in education is we think just by having faster internet, or more expensive equipment, or bigger computers, or cleverer toys, we can solve the same problem. The problem with education is that the system and the process is wrong. It's not the tools. And if we just keep throwing new tools and bigger tools and cleverer tools at the same problem, we will continue to get the same results. You see, the tragedy of this set of pictures is that actually, I don't even need to show you the last slide. So here's the thing. The first job we have to do is recognize that all we do if we keep piling things on top of what we're already doing is we just create more and more stress. It's why, actually, we're finding it so hard to live in this world that has become so incredibly uncertain, that is changing so fast, because we weren't prepared to live in this world. We weren't educated to live in this world. It's why I believe as I travel the world, there has become a fundamental crisis in the planet at a human level because people have never felt less in control of their own lives. It's why I think there is a rise in extremism, why there is a lack of trust in the structure and system and political structures that we live by. It's why the business community is in so much trouble, because people no longer feel in control. You know, it was easy when we were children to say, or for our parents to say to us, if you go to school and you study hard, you might get to university. And if you get to university and study hard, you can get a degree. And if you get a qualification at university, you will be guaranteed a great job for life. We know, don't we, by hard experience, certainly since 2008, that there is virtually an entire generation of highly qualified university students who are now stood there saying, "Where's my job?" There are huge numbers of people from our generation who did everything right, who did everything they were told to do, who studied hard, who learnt to answer the questions they were asked, who passed their exams and learnt to answer the next set of questions and jumped through the hoops and played the game, who went to work and worked hard for 20 years in the same job, in the same career, who are now stood there saying, "Where's my life gone?" There has never been a greater time. And I believe, we talk a lot in the press at the moment about the horrendous diseases in the third world, in the developing world, diseases like Ebola. But I think the greatest disease of the 21st century is this one. And one of the things we need to start understanding, I believe, is that this is not a sign of weakness. This is not a sign that only weak people suffer from stress or mental health problems. But actually, this is the greatest disease of the 21st century. We need to do something about it, and we need to understand it. Now, when I wrote my book on change, I'm not an expert on stress, but I did some research into the whole nature, particularly of work-related stress. And on the next slide, and I'll read the lines to you just so that the translator can translate the information. What I've got on the next slide are a few of the major clinical early warning signs of work-related stress. I'm going to read them to you, and whilst I'm reading them to you, I want you to consider three things on a very personal level, not to talk necessarily with other people now, maybe later you can. One, how many of these symptoms are you personally familiar with? How many of these symptoms do you see in some of your colleagues and friends and people you work with? And finally, and maybe most powerfully, how many of these symptoms do you recognize if you either have children or teach children in the students you work with? Okay? Let's get serious for a minute. So, number one symptom, anxiety when something new is suggested. 2, tension. You become rigid in new and novel situations. 3, you tend to self-medicate with drugs. Now, I'm not talking about illegal drugs here. I'm talking about over-the-counter medicines with drugs and alcohol that you self-medicate. I do it. On a Friday night, I go home and I say, "Oh, I've had a really bad week. Where's the whiskey?" 4 days later, when I wake up, I realize I might have drunk too much. We have a tendency to complain during new experiences or new activities. And finally, you tend to focus on the negatives, not the positives of a new experience. Let me give you an example from the teaching world. And I understand this was a debate and discussion yesterday. And I am not by any way saying that these issues aren't real. But I want to exemplify what I mean within education. When we talk about the future of education, when we talk about the power of new technology in education, when we talk about how we need, as a profession of educators, to transform the education community, many educators get excited and they drive forward. However, let's be honest, There are many educators I know that will stand there and give me 10 reasons why we can't do it. Oh, I'd love to, Richard. I'd love to do some of the things you're talking about, but I can't because of funding, because the government won't let me, because blah, 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 blah. Now, here's a real challenge for us as a profession. We have to create the conditions where teachers behave like professionals. You see, professionals don't stop at problems. Professionals solve problems. Let me tell you about one of my best friends in the world. He's a man I have huge respect for. Now, from that picture, I doubt any of you will recognize him. Many of you won't recognize him when I tell you his name. His name is Sébastien Foucault. Sébastien is French, he's a Parisian, and Sébastien is the founder of free running, or parkour. You know that thing where people leap over buildings and do all sorts of incredible... Now, you will all have seen Sébastien if you ever saw the James Bond film Casino Royale with Daniel Craig. How many of you saw the James Bond film with Daniel Craig, Casino Royale, the first one he made? Do you remember the opening sequence where James Bond is chasing a bad guy over buildings and cranes and they're jumping off stuff? That is Sébastien, right? I know. And Sébastien also choreographed Madonna's last world tour. How cool is Sébastien? That's why he's my friend. You get to my age and you need to hang out with cool young people to feel okay. I hang out with Sébastien so I feel alive. So because I'm with him, people think I might be a bit cool. Right? He's an amazing human being. Now, when I tell you a few things about Sébastien, remember the image of the scene in that film, okay? He's jumping off cranes hundreds of feet in the air. And by the way, there were no safety wires. That was done for real. Not with Daniel Craig, obviously, but Sébastien did that for real, right? It was done over 2 weeks, but they did it in one take. Here's the really interesting thing about Seb. He is scared of heights. Not like a little bit shaky, like properly scared of heights. There's a thought, right? Now, let me tell you about Sébastien's mindset. When we were together a few years ago, we were doing a speech, or a couple of speeches, in Ekaterinburg, which is a city in Russia. And Ekaterinburg is famous because it's the city where the Tsar and the Tsarina and their children were slaughtered at the end of the Russian Revolution. And it's an amazing city because it's a city where the architecture tells the history of the country. So as you walk through the streets of Ekaterinburg, you see the incredible opulence of the pre-communist era. Beautiful buildings, you know, much like some of the buildings and architecture in Barcelona. Beautiful buildings. Then, as you reach the communist age, you see these horrible, concrete, emotionless, featureless buildings. And now what you're seeing is an explosion in new expression. You're seeing the birth in new architecture, new, stunningly modern, different, challenging buildings and spaces. So as I was walking through the streets, I was like a child at a firework display. Because you can imagine, I am an excitable person. So I'm walking through the streets going, oh, wow, oh, look at, oh. Seb has said nothing. He's just walking with me. He's not even paying attention. Now, we get to the end of our walk, and we get to a really historic building in Ekaterinburg, which is called the Church of the Blood. What a great name. Children love it. The Church of the Blood. Yeah. Right? Now, actually, it's called the Church of the Blood because it's actually the spot where the Tsar and Tsarina and their children were gunned down. I know, but it's a beautiful building, and it's a great name, so it's okay. And we're there, and at this point, I've gone crazy. Look at that! Nothing from Seb. Nothing. I said, Seb, isn't that beautiful? Aren't the buildings beautiful? And he said, and I'm not going to do an impression of his French accent, it's very cool. He said, I've no idea what you're talking about. He said, I haven't been looking at the buildings. He said, since I was a child, I've never been interested in buildings. I said, ooh, why is that? He said, because I see buildings as obstacles. He said, the way my brain thinks is, they're things that need to be got round, over, or under. He said, what I've been obsessed with since I was a child, and I have to say, pardon me, when he said this, ever since I've seen the world slightly differently. He said, the beauty for me is in the spaces between the buildings. He said, I look at the spaces created by the buildings, but between the buildings, under the buildings, round the buildings, over the buildings. He said, because my head is always thinking, how can I move around that object? How can I get past it? How can I get round it, over it, under it, in as simple a way as possible? And as he was speaking, I was thinking, A, he's Parisian, so of course it was poetic. There's nothing worse than a cool, good-looking Parisian. I don't know why he's my friend, really. I hate him the more I think about it. But then I was thinking to myself, you know, he's talking about the mindset of what we need to possess. Not just in the 21st century, by the way. That really annoys me. I was saying this at breakfast. We need to stop talking about the 21st century like it's sometime in the future, don't we? That's really scary, do you think? I mean, here's a thought for you. There are children being born today who will be alive in the 22nd century. If we keep talking about the 21st century like it's something yet to come, by the time we've decided what to do in the 21st century, it'll be the 22nd century. And then we'll be holding conferences talking about how do we prepare children for the 22nd century, right? Stop it. Stop it. How do we prepare children for the future? It's not about years or numbers or anything else. It's about how do we prepare our children for a world that is changing at an exponential rate, right? So anyway, we got talking then over a cup of coffee. He had a glass of wine. He's a Parisian. I had a cup of coffee. And we sat talking. And we came up with an analogy, and it's this. He said, in a way, and he said it first. He said, you know, I like to think of myself as water. I said, why? He said, because nothing stops water. Water will always find a way. It's impossible to stop it. He said, and if you think about a stream, he said, on the whole, in my experience, there are two kinds of people. There are the few who think like water, and the many who think like rocks. He said, and I started to, I said, you're right. You know, education teaches children to want to be rocks. Because what we do is we say to children, the bigger you are here, the more solid you are. The more solid you are, the quicker you can find a spot and settle down and watch the world go by. Because I'm a rock, and I'm strong, and I'm solid, and now I'm a big rock. Nobody can move me. But I can judge other rocks that aren't as big as me and laugh at them, because I'm a big rock. Meanwhile, while the rocks are doing that, the water keeps flowing round them, keeps flowing over them. It's not interested in the rocks. And here's the tragedy of what I believe the 20th century has meant for us. We have all become rocks, because that's what we were trained to be. Build it here, be big, be strong, be wide, be difficult. Sit down, find your home, buy a house, do all this, get a job, stick to that job, bang. The problem with rocks is this, that the longer they're there, eventually they get eroded away. Bit by bit, they get eaten away by the water, until eventually there's nothing left. The truth is, the rock won't last forever, but the water will. because the water is obsessed with constantly finding its way round stuff. So one of the key questions for me is, how do we create an environment where we help our children to see and live their lives like water? You see, the interesting thing is, they're born like water. I often say to people, and particularly if I'm talking to private corporations or businesses, I'll say to them, you know, if you want a creative workforce, then never hire anyone over the age of 5. Because when you think about it, we're not born disliking change. We're not born not wanting to discover and find out new things. If you think about it, in the first 5 years of life, every child is like water. There's no child that when they're 2 or 3 years of age says, actually, if it's all right, I just want to sit here for a few hours and read my newspaper and watch my favorite television programs and eat my favorite food. Children under 5 don't do that, do they? Children under 5 are born into a world of change. They're born into a world of uncertainty. If you think about it, when we spring from the womb, we know nothing. We don't even know, beyond our biological links, what our parents are. There are no foundations and solidity in our lives. Yet there are experts that will tell us in the first 5 years of our lives, we learn somewhere between 70 and 75% of everything we'll learn in our lifetime before we're 5 years old. Now, I'm not talking about stuff. I'm not talking about knowledge and content here. But if you think about the complexity of what we learn in the first 5 years of our lives, it's remarkable. We learn to walk and talk. We learn to understand body language, facial expression, vocal tone, and intonation. We start to make sense of the world around us. Sounds, smells, touches. All of that complexity happens in the first 5 years of life. The graph of learning in human existence tends to go like this. First 5 years of life. Next part of life. Adult life. Isn't that tragic? So one of the things we have to do is understand what it is we do to children to remove that natural ability to think like water. What is it we do to turn them into rocks? Now, I'm not a technologist, but my instinct, having played with technology for as long as it's been cool and sexy and okay for people my age to do it, is that it is an incredibly powerful empowerer and catalyst. And when I look at my children at home, my son and my daughter, using their technology, they use their technology to help them think like water. My son does it to help him learn Russian. My daughter does it to help her write her history assignments. And the thing is that when we're young and we're given technology, it just accelerates and empowers us more to think like water. What we mustn't do as an education and technology community is make the mistake of thinking what we have to do is work out how to use technology to continue to train our children to think like rocks in a more efficient way. Now, I'm going to finish because I can't believe this. I'm running out of time. You're all sat there thinking, thank goodness for that. I'm going to tell you one final story, and then I'll get out of your way, and you can enjoy the really important parts of today, okay? I had a meeting not that long ago, and I'm only telling you this story to show off again about the famous and important people I know, okay? Because I know them and you don't, so there. A couple of years ago, I was invited to give a speech in Saudi Arabia. Now, I was on the verge of saying no. Not because I didn't want to visit Saudi Arabia, but because the theme of the conference in Saudi Arabia was empowerment. Think about that for a minute. And I was told that if I agreed to attend the conference, there would be an audience of 4,000 people. Like, wow. In my head now, I'm thinking, I'll be a rock star. Then I was told that 2,000 of those people would not be allowed in the same room as me because they were female. So I got a bit dodgy about wanting morally to go and deliver this speech on empowerment. I'm a very shallow man, though. And when I found out who the other keynote speaker was, I said yes immediately. I don't care about morals anymore. Because the other keynote speaker was a man I truly believe has changed the world. He's one of my heroes, right? And it's very rare in life you get to meet a hero, isn't it? And it's very rare in life you get to meet somebody who you believe has genuinely had a hand in changing the world. So I went, right? And before I went, I got really nervous because I was told, not about my speech, I got really nervous because I was told that I would get the chance to have 5 minutes alone in a room with my hero as my reward for going to deliver this speech. So for weeks beforehand, you know if you're going to meet a hero, you overthink the situation. So I'm overthinking this. Let me tell you about the 2 things I did. My children and wife, by the end, were so sick and tired of this, right? Because the first thing I thought to myself was, I need to practice how to say hello to my hero. I mean, how do you say hello to a man who's changed the world? Do you? I mean, I'll tell you my problem, right? Do you walk into the room with a man who's changed the world and act casual? Hi. Yo, bro. I mean, what do you do, right? Do you go in like all kind of... Like, what do you do? I thought, you've got to get this right. First impressions count. So I practiced in front of my mirror. I got my hello absolutely perfect. Not too formal, not too casual. Hello, hi, lovely to meet you. I've always, always respected your work. And I practiced, first of all, in front of the mirror, and then I made my son pretend to be the famous person. It was so funny, because by the end, he was stood there texting his friends, going, yeah. My dad has completely lost his mind. Hashtag idiot. Hi. But I got my hello perfect. And then I thought, I've got 5 minutes. So I've got 5 minutes to ask the killer question, right? 5 minutes, one question. What am I going to ask a man who's changed the world that is going to maximize what I can get from him? I thought of my question. I had my hello. The event arrived. I did my speech. Then I was taken to the green room, which is where he was waiting before his speech. So I get to the door of the room, and I'm overthinking it. I'm thinking, on the other side of this door is my hero. So then I'm thinking, remember the hello. Hello, hello, hello. Remember the question. Question, question, question. Anyway, I opened the door, and he stood in front of me, and all my training went to pieces. Because I just went, no! I gathered myself. So the first part I'd blown. Then I thought, come on, you've still got time to pull back the question, right? Now, let me tell you, the guy stood in front of me was Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, right? The genius who designed the first Apple computers. In my mind, a hero, a man who's changed the world. You, I love you. And he's going, I get that all the time. He was a lovely guy, right? Anyway, I'm thinking, come on, pull it back. Do the question, do the question, do the question. Anyway, I didn't do the question. My brain had gone. All that came out of my mouth, and I promise you this is true, was, and to this day it embarrasses me, I said, hi. I said, can I have a selfie? Now wait, it gets worse. Because it's only as we're stood there and my arm is round Steve Wozniak and he's smiling and I'm looking up at the phone that I realize the damn phone is a Samsung. I hate them, Steve. Really, I do. Anyway, I blew it, but I got another chance. Would you believe it, right? I'm getting on my plane in Riyadh to fly back to London thinking, how am I going to tell my children what I did? I'll just show them the picture. By the time Steve had realized it's a brilliant selfie because he knew too, and his face was like, We got on the plane, and anyway, I sat down, and would you believe that as I sat down and put my seatbelt on, the man that came to sit next to me was Steve Wozniak. I ended up having 7 hours with Steve Wozniak. It was the best 7 hours of my life. He hated it. You've never seen anyone run off a plane in London so fast. He didn't wait for people in front of him. Get out of my way! Lunatic! Right? But actually, truth be told, joking apart, we had an amazing conversation. And am I all right for 2 more minutes to finish my conversation? So we had an incredible conversation. It turns out he's a genuinely lovely man, and he also understands education. Let me explain why. When he was a child, for all kinds of reasons, he had 2 ambitions. One was to be an electrical engineer like his dad, which of course was pretty much the course of his life. He said, and I remember him saying it to me on the plane, he said, my other ambition actually, Richard, was to be a teacher. He said, because I had one teacher when I was about 8 or 9 years of age. He said, and I was a challenging child. He said, but I had one teacher when I was about 8 or 9 years of age who made me feel like I could achieve anything. He said, so 2 ambitions. He said, of course, engineering was my life. He said, but I left Apple in 1987. And when I left Apple in 1987, I was a very lucky human being. He said, because I was one of the very, very, very few who would never need to work another day because of the success, even at that stage of what we'd achieved. He said, so what the world doesn't know about me very deliberately is I chose at that point to fulfill my second ambition. And for the next few years, I worked full-time teaching technology in my local state school. Think about that for a minute. Boys and girls, let me introduce you to your new technology teacher, Steve Wozniak. That would be cool, don't you think? So he knows a bit about education. I said, well, what have you learned, Steve? He said, well, I'll tell you. So it's very simple. He said, I felt it before when we were building Apple. He said, but I knew it, by the time I'd finished teaching, I knew it for sure. He said, the world seems to be obsessed with what we should teach our children. He said, the truth is, what we teach our children, in my opinion, is almost completely irrelevant. But how they learn, that's the greatest gift we can give our children. He said, and let me tell you why. He said, when Steve and I founded Apple, we had no idea. He said, but the thing was, the business grew really fast. Steve kept finding us investment from all over Silicon Valley by promising them stuff we hadn't even invented yet. He said it was scary for a couple of guys that were working out of his dad's garage. And the first thing he said we made and sold was a voice-changing synthesizer that we sold to our friends so that they could make prank phone calls. That's how Apple began. He said, but we started to grow really quickly. People were throwing millions of dollars at us. And we were 2 college dropouts. That's important, don't you think? The people that have truly changed the 21st century are not highly qualified intellectuals. Many of them are people who failed in the education system. I think there's a very important lesson there for governments to learn. Academic performance does not mean you are going to be a great citizen of the 21st, 22nd, or any other century. Not what it takes. So he said, we knew that we were going to have to start employing people, but that scared us. 2 college dropouts, building this thing in a garage. But we knew we were going to have to employ people. And they said, you know, we knew we had a problem because employing clever people in Silicon Valley is easy. And it was even easier in the 70s. Because everybody that was clever was heading to Silicon Valley, or so it seemed. Every high-level mathematician, physicist, computer scientist, engineer, they were all heading to Silicon Valley. Stanford University was at the heart of Silicon Valley, probably the most technologically advanced university in the world. The valley was filled with clever people. But he said one night, Steve and I went out for a drink to talk about employment. And we were sat in a bar. And he said, you know, there's a lot of rubbish written about Steve. But he said, on that night, he did say something for the first time. He turned round to me and he said, you know what was? If we're to survive, we can't be a company that makes stuff. Because if we make stuff, we'll be dead in 2 years in this valley. We have to be a company that constantly invents stuff. We have to be a company that constantly breaks the rules and rewrites the rules. That's the only way this company will have a long-term future. So employing people who are just traditionally clever is not going to help. We need something more. And that night they came up with a mantra, a promise to each other about the kind of people that they would recruit at Apple. He said, you know what, Richard? It must work because Apple still use it today as a major part of their employment criteria. And it's the mantra, the phrase that I'm going to leave you with this morning, because it's this. They said, at Apple, we will never employ anybody who needs managing. Now think about that. We need to find a way to integrate technology into the education debate to help education revision itself. So rather than creating generations who are trained to be managed, we help to nurture generations that can manage themselves. If we can do that, we can create a world that sees change for the exciting, dynamic, and positive future it brings. Thank you very much indeed.